Can I hear you guys?
Okay, shall I start?
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today we have here with us Priyank Hirani from University of Chicago Trust Water to Cloud project. Before we dive deeper into today's session, I would like to take a minute to introduce Priyank. So, by scientific training, Priyank is a B electronics engineer. After that, he did MSc in sensors and circuit design. He was a space implementation engineer, and after that, he made a transition into policy governance and student leadership, and hence his entry into the social impact world. He was also a fellow of the International Innovation Corps, and presently he is the director of Water to Cloud project program of the University of Chicago's Trust. He's also a Midcast Fellow, a Jubilee Scholar among the Unleashed Talents. I think the opening batch, and also he is the Government of India's Young Achievers Award, and also among the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community. So I'm very, very delighted to have Priyank here today with us, sharing his presentation, whose rivers are these, and how we can leverage technology to solve one of India's biggest problem, that is tackling our polluted rivers, which are in a way lifeline of any society. So thank you, Priyank. Thanks a lot for giving us your time and putting together this interesting presentation, which I'm confident those who are watching us live today will find useful through interaction with you, and others who will be seeing this presentation in the due course of time will again benefit from this. So thank you, Priyank. Very delighted to have you on board with us today.
Thank you, Darshana. First of all, thank you also to VigyanShaala for hosting this, and congratulations for having this series going on. Before I start my talk, I just want to wish everyone Happy Teachers' Day. It's an important day in our lives, and I am what I am today because of my teachers, my mentors, my guru. So a big thanks to all of them. And yeah, let me get started with the presentation. Darshana has given my introduction already, so I'm not going to bore you with all the details again. I call myself as an engineer turned social scientist. So trying to delve into multiple things, understanding the science bit, technical bit, engineering, and then moving on to more social science and leadership. So that has been my journey. It's an ongoing journey. There is learning that always goes on. But let me take you through some of the work that I have been engaged with for the past 4 years, and that is very close to my heart. The issues around water pollution in India and more globally. And let me share my screen and the presentation to begin this talk. Right. I hope all of you are able to see my screen. So yes, the topic that both Vijay and Darshana wanted me to speak about was something that is quite close to my heart, but also something extensive discussions on. And that is this question that sort of lingers in my mind around whose rivers are these, right? So when we talk about rivers, when we talk about public goods, common properties, the question often arises as to who is responsible for them, who is accountable for them. And the short answer, of course, is that all of us and none of us, right? So it is mainly around who wants to take care of them. What have we got to? Where are we today in trying to conserve rivers, in trying to feel that rivers are a part of our lives? Since it's Teachers' Day, I thought I should draw some parallels between rivers and teachers. And as you would notice, most of the rivers in India are all have names with Ma. We say Ganga Ma, Saraswati Ma, and they're all related to mothers. And they say mothers are a mother is a child's first teacher, right? And even more broadly, I feel like there are a number of aspects between teachers and rivers that I feel are quite common. And some of those are listed here, which is around both of them being the selfless givers, right? So a river actually is serving a lot of purposes around people's lives. It's thriving biodiversity. It helps animals and birds and fish. A river is quite flexible, it's adaptable. A river flows, it keeps changing its course as and when it needs to, and a teacher often has to adapt to a class's need. I would like to believe that humanity as a society thrives around rivers, right? So most of the important civilizations in ancient times were around rivers. Even now, the mega cities in the world, a number of them are very close to rivers, and that is the availability of the water for building that ecosystem. And similarly, you thrive around gurus, you thrive around your mentors. There's also an aspect of course correction. So your teacher gives you an exam and sort of lets you learn from your mistakes and course correct. A river, in some sense, when you have sort of floods in rivers, that is nature's indication to you that humanity is not maintaining its share of the duties in keeping it well, and hence it's giving you a chance to course correct. On a lighter note, a river keeps flowing, and oftentimes some teachers also just are into their flow and all finish a 50-minute lecture on the go, and I'm going to try that too today. But more critically, I feel like both the river and the teacher has to have a very balancing act in maintaining the sustenance of everyone. But let me head on to the technical aspects of this talk. While most of you would be aware how India has about 16% of the world's population. However, it only has access to less than 4% of the global freshwater. About 70% of the water in India, the wastewater in India, ends up getting dirty, and the untreated waste enters the natural ecosystem. Indian rivers are polluted with fecal matter, organic content, industrial waste, chemical pollutants, and all of this together are the cause of the problem today, right? So where I come from is with this idea about what could one do to solve the problem of river water pollution. We started thinking and deliberating at the University of Chicago about 4 years back. And we said the first problem here is that no one has the real data, no one has reliable, authentic data to sort of make decisions. And that we thought was a critical aspect of the equation. And that's how Water to Cloud was born. I'll talk more about what this program is, but very briefly, this is about trying to revolutionize water quality monitoring technologies for rivers, lakes, any water body in that sense. And over the last 4 years, I've listed some of the partners we have worked with. And this is also sort of to let you know how it is important to work with an interdisciplinary mindset, right? So you need to have the government with you, you need to have the private sector, you need to have multinationals, and you also need some of the NGOs with you sort of to take this forward. And while today's talk is going to be focused around the data aspect of understanding water pollution problem, that is only one part of the equation. So once you have the data then needs to be driving decisions by the decision makers, by policy makers in getting things done, right? So I will very briefly towards the end of my talk touch on that aspect. But full disclaimer, we as University of Chicago, as Water to Cloud, are people from outside the government, and we actually have worked only on one part of the work, that is the data collection, data dissemination, data curation, etc. And then we nudge governments, we nudge our partners sort of to work on the decision making bit. So how does this fit into the overall picture, right? Let me take a step back and talk about what is the existing water quality monitoring scenario in the country. Right. So as most of you would be aware, and this is something that a number of students who have joined us today would be familiar with in terms of what they are doing in their laboratory testing, right? Lab sessions are often very boring, where you have to do some tests with some chemicals. You collect a sample, you mix some chemicals, you test it, you tabulate your results, and then you compare it with your peers. And then if they don't work out, you just fudge some results, right? So that's not how it's done. But essentially, once you have these results, you prepare reports. And the traditional system in most countries was that you leave these as reports. You expect some scientists to look at the reports, but oftentimes these don't reach the decision makers, right? So some of the gaps that one could identify here are that while these reports exist, they don't do enough in transferring this knowledge, this data, to insights, to analysis that can then be used to change the course of action. Some of the problems here are also that, for example, in India, for most rivers, you collect one data point at any given site in a month. Now, rivers are dynamic systems, right? So if you are polluting the river on a daily basis, but you have data only once every month, you are actually missing out on a lot of data. So for example, CPCB has about 35 manual monitoring stations on the river Godavari. CPCB is Central Pollution Control Board, which is India's national agency for collecting water pollution data. And Godavari is India's second largest river. So on a river that is over 1,000 kilometers long, you don't have enough number of sites where you're collecting data, A. B, you're not collecting it frequently enough to actually make sense of that data, right? The overall health of the water body is then not captured. So what you're doing is you're probably collecting data for the sake of it. There is a policy that exists that tells you that you should collect data. That is why you're doing this. But when data is not collected without the end goal in mind, without trying to solve a problem, this data is insufficient and hence it is quite meaningless. So what are some of the problems here? The data needs to be reliable. The data needs to be representative of the sample that you're collecting. The sample that you collect needs to be taken frequently enough to actually give you some information. The data needs to be supplemented with metadata. For example, when you have data collected, let's say in Varanasi, but Varanasi is still a big city, right? So if you're collecting in Varanasi at point A versus Varanasi in point B, the data might be very different. So unless you give a GPS location, your data may not be as useful to someone who is doing some analysis. And then ultimately it needs to be accessible, right? So if you collect this data and then leave it in some document, no one's going to use it. But if you make it an open data source where people can come and take a look at it, people can critique you, people can collaborate with you, and that's when innovations can be forged. So what are some of the alternatives to this traditional approach, right? And we won't go into all the details here due to paucity of time, but let's look at the lab in a field, which is you take the laboratory to the field. You look at satellite data, the second one, which is basically giving you a lot of spatial width, but then you can only take that data when the satellite is actually above the site, right? So you miss out on the temporal aspect, the time aspect. You can have fixed stationary sensors. So again, you can get data from some points, let's say 40 or 50 points across Ganga, where you can get 24/7 data. but then you don't get enough spatial distribution. And as we will see in the next few slides, you want to understand a river from both a spatial and a temporal aspect, right? So you want to see how it changes with time, but how the river's water quality changes with the location of your sampling point. And so the fourth one is the non-stationary sensors, which is what we have focused on for the last 4 years, right? So we take around sensors on a boat and take these sensors in a given area and get the data. Now here you do not get 24/7 data. You get data only for the time you are on the boat. But if you go on the boat frequently enough, let's say if you go on the boat twice a week, then you have good enough data for assessing the overall health of a river. So that's how water to cloud system may look like. To give you a sense of what this is, we take around sensors that are automated. The sensor is dipped into the water. You are on a boat. There is a meter that collects the data. The meter has GPS tagging. The meter also has a time and date stamp. And then it collects data in Excel files every 10 seconds, right? So this is very high frequency data. All of this data is then cleaned up and sent to a cloud computing storage space where some of the other curation and cleaning analysis of the data happens. And then this data is available on our website for anyone and everyone to download, as well as look at some of the analysis that we did. So to take you through the approach, right, I've just put up a few images here where in the first one I'm showing what are the site look like, what could a boat route look like on any typical day. The image there is from Rajahmundry, a city in Andhra Pradesh. The second image shows you some sensors that we use. The third image shows you how we tie them to a boat through a rod. And the sensor remains underneath the water about 1.5 feet below. And then the pictures below show you how you get an Excel file from that data at the end of the boat ride. And then you can upload this Excel file onto our internal server. And then it automatically creates some beautiful visualizations, because visualizations then make it easy for someone to understand, right? So while people at the lowest level of governance who are actually making localized decisions about water quality or what to do with this data, they may not understand what some of these technical parameters are. They will understand the difference between a red and a green and a blue. So that is basically how I can summarize this. And also to give you a sense of what is the amount of exponential growth that this sort of a technology can relate to. In the traditional method, where in about a 42-kilometer distance between two monitoring stations, you would have one data point a month. In the water to cloud methodology, we have about 4,000 data points a month between just 2 points that are 4 kilometers apart, right? Obviously, there are some disadvantages with something like this. This technology is expensive as of now. This technology may not be as accurate as the lab analysis, but then this is a good start where you can leverage technology to take you to a much higher spatial and temporal resolution data for you to actually do something with the data. These are some of the parameters, and for students on the call today, you might be able to relate to some of these. And when I was a student in my class 10th or 11th, I would oftentimes think, what are some of these parameters? And if I want to be an engineer, am I really going to be using using the understanding of what fecal coliforms are, or what BOD means, or what dissolved oxygen means? And then now that I've worked for so many years, I can tell you that everything in the world is ultimately interconnected, right? So what you need to understand is, and this is something that I realized through the work in the last 4 years, how this project has also involved data scientists. This project has computer science students. This project has water chemists. This project needs the knowledge of electronics. This project also needs some biochemists, right? So it's all related to each other, and all of us had to understand what is going on with the work of others. To give you an example of the kind of visualizations that we look at or we put up on the website, when we take the boat, we take it in a zigzag fashion in a river. So the first image, you see the line diagram, and the line image actually is how the actual boat route was. And then we extrapolated the data between the values 7 to 9 pH, and then we put out colors on them. So from that, we then interpolate this data, and then we get the 2D heat maps for the boat routes. But we also collect some lab samples, right? So as I said, this is a different method from the lab sampling method. So it was important for us to sort of verify our results with lab data, and also make a case for this data being equally good or almost good as the lab data. I'll come to this, the fourth one, later again, which is around when you look at water pollution, right? So we were measuring water quality in rivers, but we realized that the source of pollution into the river is actually from drains, right? So the 4 diagrams here are from a place called Narsapur in South India. And we said, while we're getting some hot spots of pollution into the river, let us try and go and find the source of where this pollution is originating. So we said, how do we do that? So then we identified 14 drains in the town of Narsapur, and we went into the drains to start measuring at different points. And then we said, which of these drains now seem to be slightly cleaner than the ones that are not? So then we identified the most polluted drains, and then we said, here's where the problem arises, right? So you must also think about it as trying to, in technical terms, this is called source apportionment. So you are trying to identify the source of pollution at the very beginning. Now I'll come to the interesting part, at least the interesting bits for me, which is around some of our research findings. And I've kept it simple, keeping in mind the nature of our audience. So when you have something like this, right, you're taking a boat around this area, and these are 2 maps from Rajamundry and Narsapur, as I was explaining, in South India. And in the first one, you see that there is a paper mill that is marked. And when I'm around the paper mill in my boat and I'm taking the data, you see that the values change from blue to green to red, right? And that shows the pH increases. Now, pH increases implies that alkalinity is increased, and this could be because of some of the salts that are being dumped from the paper mill, the peroxides that are being sent from the paper mill. So that is one reason there. In the second diagram, we try and map out CDOM, which is colored dissolved organic matter. So you can think of this as trying to give you some organic content into the water. And the organic content mainly comes from our domestic waste, right? So our bathroom waste ultimately leads to somewhere into the river. So when we went around the river there, we saw that there was this channel 2 that was entering the river, and channel 2 we ultimately discovered had most of the waste, domestic waste, your toilet waste, your kitchen waste, your garden waste, everything coming in to channel 2. So this was where a lot of human waste was coming in through the municipality drains and reaching the river. So that's why the organic content was very high, and this could be dangerous for some organisms in the water. This could be dangerous to if people are going to drink this water downstream, etc. So it's important to identify such hotspots. Something like the water to cloud technology can also give data to support authorities on water management. So the maps you see on your screen right now are from River Yamuna in New Delhi from 2017. So this is a week-long study that we did in 2017, where we went around the river almost every day of the week. And then we saw that on the first day, at the very top of this image, the river is flowing downstream. There is a barrage. So the barrage controls the amount of water that flows into the river downstream. So this is actually the border between Haryana and New Delhi. And that's where the Wazirabad barrage controls if water should be released to Delhi and downstream areas or not. The interesting bit is that as of now, the release of water happens in quite a random fashion. So our idea was if we know when does the water start becoming dangerous, becomes a health hazard, becomes more polluting above a certain threshold, can we intimate the authorities and say this is when you should release the water? If you do it anything later than this, it's going to be a health hazard for people. Your fish are going to die in the river. It's going to smell very bad, etc. Right? So the diagrams that you see here are basically showing you dissolved oxygen, which tells you how much is the oxygen in the water. So more the oxygen in the water, the river is cleaner, the water is better. So anything above 5 is considered good. So the first indication you would see here is that river Yamuna does not have DO above 5 most of the times, right? Which, if you live in Delhi, if you live around Delhi, you know that the river is quite polluted and it is hardly above 5. But the interesting bit was that day one, on 6th of July 2017, the barrage gate was opened. So there was some blue water there, which is cleaner water flowing in. The ones that are red spots on the left are actually showing you some of the drains. There are 14 drains that enter Yamuna from that side. And then the gates weren't opened for a week. So by 11th of July, it was 5 days later, you see that all the water is homogeneous. So while there is bad water, dirty water coming from drains in Delhi, it is mixing with all the clean water, and now the entire river is bad, right? So it is not suitable for any purpose for Delhi residents. Another aspect, as I was talking about, is how do you identify health hazards for an area? So this is the map of Narsapur, and what we did was we identified 14 different drains and where the drains were meeting the river. So we went around looking at fecal coliform, which is one of the parameters that can tell you how much is your toilet waste reaching the river. And this is not a good thing. So you want to understand how many insanitary toilets are there. So basically, not to put too much jargon here, but toilet waste should not end up in drains and should not end up to the river. That's the basic thing here. But if your toilet and the toilet pits are not designed properly, then this waste is going to enter through the drains to the river. Rainwater will flow into the drains and then it will take it there. So what we identified and what is marked here is that on the left, on the x-axis, I'm showing the drains. On the y-axis, I'm showing the logarithmic of fecal coliform here. And as you can see, that drain D3, S3, and S4 are the three drains where the values were much higher than some other places, right? But also, when you look at the map on the left, the red dots are showing you households through a government survey with insanitary toilets. And what we found out was that you could very easily correlate which places had insanitary toilets, and then the corresponding drains were causing the problem, right? So now if you are a government officer, then having such a data with you, you can actually start identifying without actually going to the houses themselves, which houses need help. So these could be, and oftentimes these houses are in the slum areas, they are in the marginalized communities which do not have the resources to put up a good toilet. So that's something that can help the government. You can also do something like a water usage analysis, which basically tells you how much water how good the water is to drink, to bathe, to use it for industries. Can I just use it to water my plants? Can I use it in my farms, etc. Right? So if you look at the figure on the left, it is telling you on different dates we measured the water quality in river Godavari, and on the y-axis is the water quality index. So we calculated the water quality index and then we plotted that, and for most cases it was good. So the category good from CPCB standards implies that it can be used for bathing or drinking. But on some days it also went to bad, and those are the days, if you do not have data for that, it may be dangerous for you to drink that water or use it for bathing. And oftentimes a number of people in cities, in places like Rajamundry, Varanasi, etc., which are considered sites of pilgrimage. You would see people taking a dip in our holy rivers, and this could lead to some health hazards. We also take all this data and then we try and do some machine learning, some predictive analysis on this data. So I won't go into too much technicality with these things, but basically what we do is that let's say we measure 10 parameters in the field in real time, but you cannot measure every parameter in the field. You still need to rely on lab measurements for a few parameters, and these lab measurements could take up to a week to give you the data, right? But because rivers are dynamic systems, you have to make decisions immediately. So what do? So then we created this black box, right? So we created a neural network algorithm where we said, can I give these inputs of the real-time sensor values? And then by knowing the relationship that exists between them and some parameters that I need information on, can I create a model which can approximately, let's say up to 80-90%, define the value for these other parameters, which are mainly around organic content, and then help me in predicting those values in real time. So something like this can then help you in understanding where to put your interventions at. The ultimate idea for us was this concept of geopixel, right? So all of you understand pixels. We have pixels in a camera, phones, etc. But if you look at pixel as, let's say, a unit by unit square box of any place on Earth, can I start layering up data, right? So I have population data, I know soil type, I know rainfall, I know some health information from the measurements that we talked about today, right? I know pH, I know electrical conductivity, I know BOD, I know the amount of metal content there. So when I layer all of it at one place, and then can I apply some machine learning models to these, then can we have different information? Can we have new insights as to what we can do with this data? So this is like a futuristic view, but also some people have begun thinking on these lines. Very briefly, I wanted to also touch upon how all of this science and data, right? I said this is the information we collect, this is data, and it's knowledge, it's powerful knowledge. But what do you do with this data? How does it help someone? How does it help someone in improving their life is what is crucial. So I will talk about some of the work that we have done with social scientists in trying to see how water pollution is affecting lives of communities residing around rivers. So the first study we did, this was about 2 years back, which is around understanding from different people living on Yamuna Ghats in Delhi, right? So we went and spoke to farmers, priests, fisher folks, we spoke to rag pickers, we saw a number of women working around that area, we went to boatmen, and then we said, we had extensive conversations with them and we tried to understand what is their perception of the river, how have they seen the river change over the years, and how has the river affected them and their livelihoods, right? So for many of the younger people on this discussion today, as it will be very surprising it was for me when we sort of met some of the people in their 60s and 70s, and they said they used to go and take a dip in Yamuna. There used to be like a swimming competition in Yamuna in Delhi. The Yamuna water in 1950s and 60s was carried in buckets and taken to Chandni Chowk and was distributed for drinking. Now this is an idea that I cannot fathom my head around, because today the Yamuna water is not even worthy of look, right? So it's so dirty, it's dark, it's black, it smells. But there was a time when it wasn't this, right? So it's also about for all of us as human beings to think, what did we do wrong? Because as I said, we're starting to think about the question, whose rivers are these, right? So it is ultimately our shared responsibility. I'll not go too much into the findings of these reports, but let me take two examples. So we asked people what kind of activities they used to engage in when the river was clean. And as I said, it was surprising for us that about 50% said that they would go and swim. People used to go and bathe. People used to fish. There aren't many fish available in Yamuna in Delhi now. When we asked them what activities do they do around the river now, it wasn't very surprising that most of these percentages that you see here were all below 25% now. We also asked them how has the river water quality changed in the last 10 years. And while a number of experts sitting in government offices do not want to give voice to these marginalized people, these people who we think are slum dwellers living in right next to the river, they wouldn't know what is happening. People do see and understand, even if you're not educated, that the water quality deteriorated, right? So about 72% thought that the quality reduced. They also talked about how that had affected their health over the years. While they wouldn't be able to pinpoint the exact disease or illness from that water, they would say things like, I am getting more rashes if I go into the water now. And so like skin disease is another problem from these waters. This was a study we did with Yamuna. We also did another study for residents around Ganga. So this time we picked up 4 sites, Narora, Unnao, Jangipur and Tribeni. And we took we talked to 1,600 respondents, and these were specifically from the fishermen community. So we asked them about how their livelihoods had changed, and most of them said that the volume of fish catch over the years had changed. The kinds of fish, the species of fish that would give them more money had disappeared. Right? They also talked about how they weren't considered an integral part of the ecosystem. And it was also very surprising for us and quite interesting to find out when we asked them that that the industries are polluting the water. What if we said that the industries would pay you a certain amount each month to compensate you for this? And they said, no, we don't think that's the right way to go about this. We treat the Ganga as our mother, it's Ganga Ma, and we think that anyone who pollutes the river should be penalized. So you punish the industry that's polluting the water, you stop the government, municipalities from putting waste into the water, and then you let the river be clean. We do not want compensation for this, but just do the right thing. So that was quite interesting for us to find out. And it also means that you should start involving these people in decision making. You should start having more localized decision making in the future by giving them access to the information that they need. So these are some of the examples of reports that we have released in the last couple of years, and the events that we have conducted. As I was saying at the start of my talk, it is difficult to move ahead when you want to go alone, right? As the saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go farther away, then you must take other people with you. So one of the learnings for us from this journey was that when we started working on the technical aspect, we said, this is our work. We'll do the data collection and give the data to the people who have to make decisions, but actually not go and work with them. And we realized this wasn't the right approach. So soon we started engaging with the different actors in the ecosystem and said, let us now look at the human aspect of the problem. Let us now look at what is the government's limitation in trying to act this scenario. And that's how we started building the entire ecosystem. And we worked with World Bank, we worked with UP government, we worked with NCAER as it's listed here, we worked with Dalberg. So all of these together, then we understood the problem from different aspects and got some interventions done. For example, when I spoke about the problems in Narsapur and how the drains in the town were carrying human waste, that was also because Narsapur did not have a treatment facility, right? So in the last 3 years, then we have ensured that the government put up money and they put a treatment facility in Narsapur town. So now the waste is not going into the river directly. it is getting treated, and then the water goes into the river. In a similar way, we worked with World Bank's Water to 2030 Water Resources Group and the UP government, and they looked at the Hindon River. Hindon is supposed to be India's most polluted river, and they said, how do we address this problem of pollution from all the angles, right? So they got together all the different departments to share the data amongst themselves, and then start looking at how to collaborate. So this is the approach that one needs to take in figuring out the entire ecosystem. These are some of the recommendations that we have put forward to the governments in the past, and we're also working with them in trying to implement some of these things. More on a 30,000 feet level, one would have to understand that real-time monitoring in India is pretty new. Monitoring using sensors is also new, but you do have the technology, right? IoT devices have progressed. You have wireless technologies now that you can start thinking beyond labs. And this has not happened also because there is no clear policy around it. There is no acceptable monitoring protocol. And so that is one of the things that we have been working with the government in trying to see how can you develop this and have a common understanding for this sort of monitoring. The more important thing is to decentralize the power structure, build trust amongst the government, private sector and communities, and also involve more people in this decision making. That's it. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. All our data is available on the website link that I've mentioned here, and my email ID is there for any support that anyone may need. Back to you, Darshana.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Darshana.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. So thank you, Priyank. That was a very, very loaded and informative session. So I'm sure all the audience that have been listening to us today and those who will listen to us in future, like, who will come and watch this video later, will learn a lot from this particular interaction. And I think for me personally, this is something very, very close to my heart, seeing somebody with a training in science solving some of the most complex problems of our times, and what would be more important than water and air for a community. So first of all, thank you very much for bringing this unique approach to the developer in India. And we have some very interesting questions coming up here, which people have sort of put on the put on the chat box, and I'm just going to pick some of those questions. Professor Mukesh Kumar from Cambridge, he's asking, how does the whole water cycle, basically the harmful river, contaminate our food system from farming, processing and cooking and eating? Any pointers about that would be very helpful.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Darshana?
The question is like, how does the harmful river, like, the whole contamination in the river water, how is it infiltrating our food system, like all the way, not only in the agriculture growing part, but also processing and cooking aspects of it?
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you, Professor, for that very important question. It's something that we have worked on, and there are some reports available on our website on that. Unfortunately, I couldn't bring it up here today. So the idea is, when you look at heavy metal contamination of the water bodies, the concept of food poisoning, food amplification through the food chain, right? So there is a fish that eats, that drinks its water, and then the heavy metal is going into the fish, the body of the fish, and then when you catch the fish, you're going to eat it, and it enters the human chain, right? So the whole food chain is interlinked, and this sort of magnifies as you go to the higher cycle. So it is an important issue, and it sort of percolates through the entire cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So and when again our human waste goes back to the river, and then heavy metals go back into the river, it sort of
Mm-hmm.
keeps circulating in the cycle itself. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's very useful. We have some questions from Professor Rajalakshmi Datta from Uttarakhand, and she's asking any immediate policy measures to save the rivers in the Himalayan state and the Himalayas, because I think there were recent reports that said that Ganga is polluted even at its origin. So, what are your policy recommendations, and if you have done any studies higher up in the Himalayan belt, like towards the origin of these rivers?
Yeah, yeah. Again, thank you for the question. We have unfortunately not done any studies high up in the Himalayas.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite places in the world. So, would love to do that someday. Himalayan ecosystem, as the professor knows, and as all of us would know, is amongst the most vulnerable ecosystems. Right, it's most
Mm-hmm.
fragile, and so water pollution issues get amplified in that ecosystem entirely. Some of the policy recommendations that I would want to give are in terms of trying to have more environment friendly tourism,
Mm-hmm.
trying to not have large scale projects that might be harmful for the ecosystem. Right, there's this whole debate about dams being constructed, and the huge power plants projects that are going on in the
Mm-hmm.
Himalayas, and how that may also be affecting the water system. One of the things that again I didn't get to speak about today is how rivers cannot be looked in isolation, right? So you have to
Mm-hmm.
look at the entire river and ecosystem, and
Mm-hmm.
you should also look at the water cycle. So they say there is a 6 to 7 year water cycle in rivers, and one needs to understand that if you let rivers be, right, so if you reduce the pollution entering the river, then in about 6 to 7 years there is a possibility for it to revive itself. That is one of the things that is possible. Yeah. I can't hear you, Darshan.
I'm sorry, my microphone was mute and I was talking. So I hope I'm audible now. So I have another question, which is in continuation of what you said. We cannot look at rivers in isolation. So this is again from Professor Mukesh Kumar. His question is in continuation with his previous question, which said. Because food is already entering our processing, cooking, contaminated water is already entering our food, farming, processing, and industries. If the answer is yes, with evidences, then it is just not a humanitarian question, but it also a business and a societal problem. And how do you foresee businesses playing a role, both small scale and large scale, in tackling this problem?
I completely agree. I think getting businesses to play a role is the future, right? So I feel like water, and especially rivers, have been ignored so far for two reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One, because if it was just your drinking water, then your water being bad affects you. If
Mm-hmm.
your river water is bad, let's say I live in Delhi and my water in Yamuna is bad, or if I am the perpetrator, if I am polluting that water, then that is going to affect someone downstream. Someone sitting in
Mm-hmm.
Agra is going to be affected by that. So river water is sort of someone else's problem. It's further away from you. The second thing is that no one has actually thought through the business case for this, right? So, getting the rivers to become cleaning rivers, getting the water to be better for use cases such as drinking, bathing, etc., then helps you look at improved health outcomes. If your health is better, then that helps you sort of be more productive at workplace. That helps a lot of kids go to school, not be falling sick because of the bad water. So this is also one of the things that came out from both our studies, actually, the Yamuna study and the Ganga study, and the reports are available on the website, which said that how you could link the problem of water pollution and then how it enters your food with socioeconomic aspects, right? So you look at how it's affecting businesses, how it's affecting health, how it's affecting livelihoods. And then you also see that it is affecting these things around rivers, right? So you're trying, also affecting the biodiversity in any place. So if businesses take a more forward-looking approach, right? If you start looking at it in the long term, then while the investments at the initial stages might be higher, as a long-term perspective, you are doing enough to reduce the impact of all the bad things that have happened so far. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So we have another question from Dr. Bhavatosh Sharma from Dehradun. He's asking, please tell about water resource management and related jobs for students, and how you see young people from various courses coming in together and contributing to this cause.
Sure, yeah. I am a big believer in the power of youth, and I feel like young people can contribute to the sector, not just this sector, but in trying to solve any issue around water in very different ways, right? So if you are a student, you can start doing things at least at an individual level. So the first step is always to start with yourself, right? So you are trying to not cause water pollution by yourself. You are also trying to reduce the amount of wastewater that comes out of your household. So water conservation, water quantum, and water quality are also related. And then you start talking about these issues in your community, right? So if you want to initiate the dialogue at your school level, at your college level, that's the first good step. In terms of what kind of roles people might expect in the water industry, as I said, looking at just by this one program that we designed for the last 4 years, you can think of various different roles around this, right? And I think this is the future of workspaces overall. With the fourth IR, now people are talking about the fifth industrial revolution. You are not going to be speaking of specific jobs, you're going to be talking about specific issues, right? So you want to try and solve an issue, and I would encourage people to think about what issues are they passionate about and how can they contribute to that problem through their skills, right? So for water, you can think of the people coming from water chemistry. You can think of people being water engineers. You can think of people trying to create these data visualizations for water stuff, right? So again, the answers are varied. You can also think of perspectives from water policy implementation. So it is as broad as you want it to be. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Priyank, for that answer. We have another comment from Heyman from Leeds. He's saying, thank you, Priyank, for presenting your work. Very informative. He has two questions. First of all, how does this affect small-scale farmers who largely depend on free water for irrigation? And this is throughout the length of these rivers, because farmers who have access to cleaner water probably are less likely to be affected, and those further down the stream may be more affected. And the second question that he has is, do you share the information that you generate with local stakeholders? If yes, how it has changed local decision making in context to food system management? If you have any insights on those.
Sure, yeah. Let me start with the question about small scale farmers. We have worked, so how something like this may affect small scale farmers who rely on water from government supply. I feel, and this I understand is not going to make me very popular with the audience here or elsewhere. I feel like this whole notion of getting something for free in the country needs to stop, right? There is a price that we pay for the water use, and someone needs to talk about that price. UP, and I don't know if you have read this, but UP is only in the last couple of months is trying to revise its water policy, right? And I helped some of in the initial conversations, I helped draft some of the work there. And when they were talking about the water policy, we said you need to put a price on the water. I am not saying you charge the farmers. Yes, I understand the condition of farmers in this country may not be, may not let them, like small scale farmers may not have the money to pay you, but everyone should know the worth of the water, right? So even governments trying to subsidize, and this is mainly a political issue, right? You want to gain brownie points, and that's why you keep everything for free, but nothing is actually for free. So that is the answer for how can you get small scale farmers involved here. So let them know the price of the water that they are using, right? You can always start nudging people by giving them information on how much is the amount, is the cost of the water that you're using today. And then also getting at least local administrators involved in seeing where this money is coming from, right? So right now, we don't know. Is the state government paying for it? Is the national government paying for it? Is a specific department paying for it? No one knows, right? The other thing is about whether we share information with local stakeholders. Yes and no. We have shared information. So all our information is available on our website for anyone to come and look at. Having said that, I understand we don't expect everyone to come and look at the website. So we do need to do more to reach out to specific stakeholders. So far, we have worked with government partners. We have worked with agencies that are doing research on this sort of work. And we have worked with specific communities, right? So we have tried getting the fisherman community that I spoke about in seeing if you have such data, then what will you do with the data?
Yeah.
And oftentimes what we have realized is that if you give them an app, that is difficult for them to see because they're like, there are so many apps here. If you just put it out on a website, they don't want to look at it. But there needs to be an easier mechanism to get this data to them, right? That is one. Second, as a research organization, as a program that is designed around just this, we are a minute drop in the ocean, right? So when we try and give out data, it is very limited. So we can work with a limited set of stakeholders in trying to help them understand what they can do with this data. When the government starts doing this, then it reaches, it is at scale, right? So our model has been around giving some evidence to the government that if you have some data like this, then here are the actors who are willing to use that data and make a change to their life. And how can you now correct your actions to sort of take this forward? So that is what we've been working on. Yeah.
Okay. That's very useful to know. And of course, anything at scale, if it needs to be done, government has to be a key player in it. So very well done on that, on advising the government of one of the biggest states in country, Uttar Pradesh. So the next question is from Tejesh from Cambridge. He's asking, the proposed quick estimation of water quality through field sensors may not probably give indication of COD or BOD, which are required for water treatment. I know DO or pH might give an indication, but COD or BOD is required for better planning of wastewater treatment. So how do we go about doing this? And then he has a follow-up question to this. The wastewater needs to be treated either by primary or secondary treatment before discharging them into local water bodies. So wouldn't it be better to measure the quality of water discharged by industries and alert local authorities rather than measuring the water quality of rivers after the discharge has already been done? Comments, please.
Sure. Very intriguing questions. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah. Thanks to him. You are right. So you do not get COD or BOD for the rest of the audience. This is chemical oxygen demand or biochemical oxygen demand, which are organic parameters that are crucial for the design of a wastewater treatment plant. And yes, you don't have any sensors in the world as of now that can give you this sort of data in real time. But you have proxy measures, right? So as I was talking about, we have the Turner C3 sensor, which we use to measure some other organic parameters, and then we combine this with the understanding of pH, EC, DO, and all of this then put into a machine learning model. So we tried a bunch of different models that can give you an estimate of COD or POD. We haven't been very successful, so we have reached like 70, 80 there, but not 100%. You may not need 100%, right? So if you're using this data to get information on designing treatment plants, you can go and collect a few samples. That's okay. What I am getting to is we are using this data to empower citizens on making decisions about their life. If you want to decide whether this particular ghat, and there are like some 79 or 80 ghats in Varanasi, to go and take a dip. If I want to decide which ghat today is giving me clean water to take a bath, so how does one find out that, right? If I am deciding how much amount of water should I release to keep the water quality intact, I don't need COD and BOD immediately there, something like that. Yeah? And sorry, what was the second question around wastewater treatment plants?
So second question is, just give me a minute, yeah. So he's telling the wastewater needs to be treated either by the primary or secondary treatment before discharging into the local water bodies. So wouldn't it be better if you measure the pollutions coming out of the local industries and then alerting the government? I do remember seeing one of the slides in your previous presentations where you said that some of the industries were releasing pollutants late at night. So maybe
Yeah. So the question is not either or; it's both, right? So it is not that you can just do one and leave out the other. You should ideally do both. In a real practical world, there are constraints around costs. There are constraints around privacy. So I don't know about Cambridge, but in India, most of the large-scale industries which come under the GPI category, which is grossly polluting industries category, are mandated to sort of have their own monitoring systems before the waste leaves the premises, right? There is also this concept of liquid discharge, ZLD, which some of you might be aware, where these industries have to move towards not discharging any liquid waste outside their facility. So they must reuse the water. They should have an internal treatment plant, and they can use it to plant water plants, etc. So there are these things that exist in policy. There is some monitoring happening when the water leaves the premises of the industry. But as if you think of the problem from a government of India's perspective, you cannot just go behind every industry and try and target them, right?
Yeah.
So when I talked about the question of source apportionment, what you mentioned is the ideal case, right? You want to measure exactly how much is the pollution outside each industry and then get the idea. But because you can't do it, you want to start dividing the problem. So if you now see hotspots in certain areas, then you know that there's a bunch of industry here and they might be causing the problem. So why don't I go and target those industries? That's the way to go about it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Priyank, for that insight. Again, another question from Professor Rajalakshmi. She's asking that, Dr. Priyank, can you please give some suggestive measures to help local communities in the Himalayas to understand the river resources in a better way? If there are any resources that you could point to, because Dr. Rajalakshmi is also a professor, how can we sensitize them in a layman's language? If there are any resources, useful resources, you can point out, so that would be very helpful.
Sure, yeah. So there is not a unified repository of data, but there are some attempts that have been made around how communities can be integrated into some of the work that is happening here. There's an organization called Intact that has done some studies, and they have some reports. You can look at their website. There is a Yamuna Monitoring Committee. This is an NGO committee for monitoring Yamuna and water pollution around Yamuna. And they have their own website. I think it's called yamuna.nic.in. They have a bunch of resources on that website. There are other smaller NGOs that work more directly with communities. And that is something that one may have to look at. But also, I would encourage that we look at how people in other geographies have worked on this problem. So when we look at Yamuna, we think of the river as being such a polluted river today. If we go back a few decades, the rivers in UK or the rivers in US or the Seine in Paris, these were also polluted at one point, right? It was actually the communities that said, this is a problem for us. We are not going to let it persist. The government may or may not want to do something. Let us come together and solve this problem, right? So it is about how the communities can come together. A couple of quick things on what communities can do. A, try and not be a part of the problem, right? B, try and not be blindsided by the problem. So it's very easy. I live in Delhi, and it's very easy for me to say that I am doing my bit in not polluting Yamuna. But I also know that my wastewater from the house ends up in the river. And I am, by not raising my voice against this, I am sort of trying to be ignorant to the problem. So, and this problem is something that can be tackled very well at localized levels in the Himalayan community. So, I have interacted with some communities, and thanks to Darshana, that has been possible. I've interacted with some communities in the Himalayas, and I know how strong the communities are, right? So, when the communities are strong, the sense is strong, then you can have these communities put pressure on localized governments to take these problems and solve them. Yeah.
Thank you, Priyank, for that question, for that answer. We have a question from Meghna. She's asking, has the government acted based on your work and brought any changes to the state of rivers in our country? I would just like to append a small bit of questions on my part to this. It's particularly regarding one of the most heard about river projects of our time, Namami Gange. Have you been interacting with the team there, and how do you see the progress that has been made on Namami Gange in the past 6 years? How has it sort of, what changes has it brought, and what more could have been done?
Sure, yeah. So has any of our work translated into getting the government to do something? I would not like to think that I'm that important for anyone to take seriously, that the government just listens to us. But in all humility, I'll say this, that we started putting out data visualizations 4.5 years back. And then we were constantly engaging with the government, and we were nudging them to start looking at, even if their data was from stationary measurements, we said, can you start putting it out? Can you start putting them out as data visualizations? And then 2 years back, I think the Central Pollution Control Board did have a platform where they put out their data in a beautiful visualization, right? There are issues with that data. There are issues with the visualization. I think it was also taken down in between because governments are very sensitive with like a media house critiquing them or something. But that was sort of a small win for us to see that. And it's not just us, right? There must be a few others like us who must be nudging them on and on. Having interacted with the Jal Shakti Ministry, having interacted with the Pollution Control Board, I can tell you that in closed door conversations, there is a lot of appetite for technological solutions. People are interested, people want to leverage technology, and they want to see the problem of river pollution disappear. But it is not that simple, right? So it is not something that with Namami Gange, we feel like is with a few treatment plants that are being created around the river, you're going to solve the problem. Or just by beautifying the ghats in Varanasi, you're going to solve the problem. The problem is much deeper. So the problem needs to be thought at a 360 degree with a 360-degree lens, and one needs to see how the community can reduce its contribution to the pollution. How can you stop pollution, right? So also with some of the reports that we have been putting out, you've also seen that the tanneries industry in UP, which were a major contributor to the pollution, were made to stop its functioning for a few months, right?
Yeah.
And you would think that the industry lobby is so strong in this country that is difficult, but it is also about priorities. So the interesting bit there was that the Mahakumbh Mela was coming up at the start of 2019, and then we had to put up a good front in trying to see that our water is clean, right? So I would just hope that the Kumbh Mela comes every year, and then we just have clean rivers. A couple of other examples where we have worked very closely with governments are around the NGT committee in Delhi. So this was an interesting story where, as I said, we put out our data. We are a research organization. We are not biased towards any one particular actor in this ecosystem. And it was interesting that the Times of India journalist picked up some of our data from the website and wrote an article about it. In 24 hours of that article, I got two different calls, one from CPCB and another from the NGT committee. And I was scared when the first time I received that call, and I was like, what did I do wrong? And both of them wanted to invite me to have a conversation on what is this technology, how can they integrate some of this work. And just to inform the audience, our CPCB also has some of these sensors, so they do take some of these measurements. But as I said, there is a policy lag there. So we do not have a mechanism to accept sensor-based values in this country, which can be defended in a court of law. So now if the CPCB starts publishing that data, no one is going to take it seriously. So you still need to have the lab data. And so that is something that they are working towards. The NGT committee was very supportive. The NGT committee said, we love your work. Let us connect you to some of the players here and start getting this work in action for the government. So then they put us in touch with the Delhi Pollution Control Committee, and then we have worked with them jointly in the past 1.5 years. I don't know if a lot of people would know this, but Delhi Pollution Control Committee has been looking at the Nazafgarh drain, which for people who are not in Delhi, this is sort of a mini river, which is now a drain. And this is over 14 kilometers long, if I remember correctly, and it's all very dirty water. A lot of industrial waste goes into this river, and it has more than 35 or 36 sub drains, right? So the work that we were thinking of doing with DPCC was around, DPCC wanted to see which of the sub drains are the most polluting ones, and so then they can go and talk to the industries that are around those sub drains to see where the start of the problem is, right? So what we talked about earlier around source apportionment. Some of my thoughts on what can happen with Namami Gange and if it's what has happened in the past. I think there's a lot of good intent. There is the heart is at the right place for this government or for previous governments for that matter, except one needs to think more creatively. So it is not just about getting the treatment plants ready. It is not just about planting a few hundred lakhs of trees around the river. It is about solving this problem in a systemic manner, right? So you involve the agriculture department, you involve fisheries, you involve industries department, and then you get all of them to own up to their share of the problem and then start thinking with a solutions mindset. So that is what is needed with something like that. Yeah.
Okay. That's very helpful to hear, Priyank, that at least the heart is in the right place and we are heading in the right direction. One from Prashant from Bangalore. So Prashant is saying, I understood that the bureaucracy is a bottleneck, and which you just mentioned, and we know the problem and probably have an idea about the solution to it. So do you think the complacency is the reason, or is it the cost involved? involved, and how do we bring towards cleaning rivers, lakes, ponds, as you rightly give the examples of Western counterparts and also rivers in Punjab, which have been cleaned following a strong willpower. So, any comments?
Yeah. Uh, So one, when we talk about whether the bureaucracy is a problem, it is
Mm-hmm.
also important to understand that bureaucracy is not just this one entity, right? So you are
Yeah.
talking about people sitting in ministries, you're talking about people at the director level, and then at the center, at the state, at the district, at the town level. And
Mm-hmm.
something like rivers, which again I'm hoping a lot of people would know, is that rivers are both a state and a center subject, right? So rivers are common public good, and then it is everyone's problem, and that's
Yeah.
why in some ways it becomes no one's problem. So the
Yeah.
state thinks wo log kar lenge, the center thinks that someone else will do it, and then it sort of gets ignored there.
Yeah.
Having said that, I have had the opportunity to meet some of very dynamic leaders from the
Mm-hmm.
bureaucracy who have said that this is what they would like to see. This is what where they're trying to put their money as well as their manpower into place, and then they've got things running, right? So it is not that the bureaucracy is always a problem. Yes, there is some lethargy in the mechanism in which things function. Files have to move around, and that does take time. So those are some of the practical issues that can that need to be tackled. But also, oftentimes, when you work closely with the government, that's when you see that your work can actually be translated into action. So, not trying to see the government or bureaucracy as an issue, but trying
Mm-hmm.
to involve them as an in the solution would be the right approach. And as you rightly pointed out, the attitude overall needs to change towards rivers. For example, when someone goes to London and looks at the Thames, you see that it's beautiful, right? It is a very interesting case where someone had pointed out to me how. If the houses have their front yards towards the river, that will ensure that the river is taken good care of. Because now the property market, as the one of the earlier questions talked about, whether there's a business case around this, the property market, the real estate market will make sure that they want to have the prices high, and so the river is kept clean because that's the view.
Yeah.
In some other places, right? For example, one of the things that strikes me in Guwahati is that a lot of houses have their backyards to the river. And this is the Bharalu River, which ends up in Brahmaputra. And now
Yeah.
it's actually the Bharalu Nala. It's not even a river. But looking back 20, 30 years, the Bharalu River is not maintained that well because the houses had their backyards to the river. And when someone pointed this out to me, it was very interesting and fascinating to see that just by having that small change in urban design, you could have ensured that rivers are kept clean properly. Yeah.
Wow, that's a very, very interesting point you made, Priyank. Very, very, very interesting indeed. We have another question from Shreya from IIT Kanpur. She is saying this is a very informative session, so thank you, Priyank, for it. So she has a bit broader question. So she's asking you, do you think there should be a limit on the usage of household water? And do you think it would encourage people to resort to ways of reusing and recycling water locally? Because a lot of things that we use inside the house can actually be recycled with very little help.
Yeah. So I think it's difficult for households to set a particular limit
Mm-hmm.
on the water
Mm-hmm.
usage. There are, in fact, two scenarios, and this is another debate that has been going on
Mm-hmm.
for people in the policy sector would relate to this. Where
Mm-hmm.
a related question to this is whether it is okay to give 24/7 water supply to everyone,
Yeah.
or you should just give 1 hour of water to
Mm-hmm.
people, right? And this is a classic problem that has been studied for slum areas, where oftentimes the supply of water is limited to 1 or 2 hours a day, or even just like once a week.
Yeah.
Um, and it is observed that through the pilot studies that are done, Jaypal has done a few of these studies, that if you actually give someone 24/7 water, then the amount of wastage of water is less. What happens is, when you give water for a specific 2-hour period, people start accumulating and storing water even more than how much they need. And then when you have the next supply of water, they will throw away all this water if there was any leftover, and then they will get the new water. So if you just give 24/7 supply, like if there is tap water available, then people will reduce the wastage. And that's where the Har Ghar Jal Nal scheme from Jal Shakti Ministry has some of its ideas located in. Having said that, a model that can be followed is what Delhi has done, right? So there is the water cost as such that I think about the first 700 liters if you use, then it's free. But as soon as you go above that limit, then you're charged for the entire bit. So if your usage is within a reasonable limit, you are not wasting water, then sort of you're being incentivized by the government by not charging you anything. But if you are a household that has higher water needs, we are not stopping you from it. We are giving you the water, but now you are being charged for it. Another example of policy measure that can help there to answer Shreya's question is around how Bangalore has managed. So Bangalore now has a wastewater recycling policy, and every new apartment complex that is constructed will have to have its own recycling facility, and this water needs to be reused. So that is another way of ensuring that households don't waste too much water, or the non-essential needs can be tackled with not having clean water. Another little thing here, and I know we'll be running out of time soon, is about what is the level of cleanliness of the water. So what water quality are you using for what purpose? For example, if you have to use water for industrial purpose, you don't need the quality of the water same as drinking water. So if you have the highest level of water quality, then you use it for drinking. But if you have to bathe, you may not need the same quality. If you have to water your plants, you don't need the same quality. So it is also about water quality in conjunction with water quantity.
Yeah, that's a very, very useful point, and very interesting to hear about the policy level change that Bangalore has brought in to their new housing complexes. We have another question from Meghna. She says, due to COVID-19, most companies have shifted their focus to COVID-19 in terms of donation. Has the focus of various organizations working for water problem shifted to COVID in terms of donations or the financial resources they are directing to tackle the problem? And I think this also ties into another fact that a lot of pandemics find their route into not so very good quality of water that people are consuming.
No, this is a crucial question. So there are two parts. One, a lot of industries were shut, and as a number of you would have read in the papers, the water bodies all across the globe seem to have sort of rejuvenated on their own, right? So we didn't need an Namami Gange at all to spend crores and crores of rupees of money into cleaning a river. Just stopping the pollution showed that we can achieve the target, right? Now, once as the unlock 3 and unlock 4 and all that happens, and as industries start operating again, we would be seeing that the pollution levels may go back to their normal level. And this is something not just for water pollution, right? We know that traffic had reduced all across all cities in the world, and that's why the air pollution has reduced, and we may be furthering away our 1.5 degrees benchmark that we have set, which we don't want to even reach. So that is a problem that is talking about what is the long-term sustainable solution that the pandemic has sort of taught us, right? So there are a very few positives from the pandemic, and having cleaner rivers was one of the positives. Since a number of companies have shifted their focus to it, I don't think that the funding for the sector in the long run will shift. right?
Mhm.
Industries are going to be back if the problems around water are going to be back. This is a crucial year for health. This is a crucial year for looking at problems from the lens of COVID-19. But
Mhm.
another thing to remember is that no issue is again to be tackled in isolation, right? So there are some studies that are undertaken in the world right now where you have found the virus in wastewater. So the waste,
Mhm.
so they say that there are early signs that are possible through wastewater testing from different parts of the world for the virus. And so I would like to think that in the long run, this is not going to be a problem. Yeah.
So I have absolutely two last questions. One is from Bhuvan. So he's asking, so you think it's basically a livelihood versus environment debate here, particularly in the areas that you, like as Water to Cloud project has focused, and how should the government preferences look like when seen from short-term objectives and long-term one? So he's asking a question like, if we need to decide a preference chain, where will rivers and environment stand when compared to sectors of economy, particularly in case of Yamuna? And also when we are comparing it from people's perspective, for example, the example you gave about people choosing Ganga over industrial compensation has some sacred religious connection. But do you think it will work for Yamuna, particularly in Delhi, where mostly the belongingness factor and the connection to the river doesn't really come into play as much, and most of the time houses have their back towards the river, like in a metamorphically way of speaking. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't think it is a livelihoods versus environment or livelihoods versus urbanization sort of debate. I think
Mhm.
it is a question of sustainability, right?
Mhm.
So if we are thinking that we are okay with not having cleaner rivers now,
Mhm.
that's why we are reducing our engagement with the river. We
Mhm.
must also remember that in a couple of decades, this is going to be affecting the civilization around that river. So it is important to ensure that it's a sustainable way of urban development. It's a sustainable way of looking at rivers and the entire biodiversity with it. Um, Having said that, do I think if Yamuna can be revived and in the same way as Ganga, and if people, because we don't look at Yamuna as a river, people have started thinking of Yamuna as a Nala. In fact, I think we're just taking a very myopic view. So going back a few decades, as I was saying earlier in my talk, and in historical terms, these are not very long periods, right? So just going back 50 years for historical terms, this is not too much. The river was used for drinking water. The river was used for bathing. The river had a booming economy around it in Delhi, where you had boatmen going around, you have fishermen collecting fish. In fact, even from a religious perspective for Hindus, and this is something that is documented well by Ambedkar University in Delhi, which is that there used to be 400 ghat aartis every evening in Delhi on Yamuna. And now this is something that was possible, and this is something that I would want to think that is possible again in another 10 years, 20 years time, if we actually have the will to change it. And why I'm saying this is because, as I gave the example earlier, looking at New York, looking at London, looking at Paris, looking at River Rhine in Germany, these were all dirty at some point. These rivers also did not have a religious aspect connected to them. In India, we already treat rivers in a holy manner, right? So now there is the question about, if they could do it, why can't we?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's just a matter of time, and putting our resources and willpower behind it should be able to get us there. Yeah.
That's a very positive and heartening outlook to have, Priyank. I am hopeful that the kind of people that are working in this sector, and hopefully this should be a reality in next 10 years. This is absolutely the last question, unless we have any more question coming in from Sagar. He says. Can you give insights about the state of the art of IoT based systems for river monitoring, if you are aware of, and what are the possible challenges that are yet to be explored and would be great if solved? And before you answer that, I just want to say I have one small question once this is done, so that was
Please.
the last one. So over to you, Priyank.
Okay. What is the what is the absolute latest with IoTs? Was that the first question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I think IoT devices have made a lot of strides in the last decade, and you have devices that can sort of give you data on a number of these water quality parameters in real time. They have a GPS tag, they have timestamp data with that. You have wireless connectivity, you can have Bluetooth, you can have localized storage, you can have cloud computing power with that. So a number of these possibilities exist. I can, if you email me, I can list down a number of companies that are having these sensors in the market. So yeah, I feel like, and one of the things that is something that I think will resolve in the next decade is the cost of IoT devices. So the costs are still high, but they are reasonable enough for organizations to start thinking about them. We are not at a stage where these devices will be available to every other person, right? What I would want to see is sort of, if I have something like a pen where I can have these measurements done by just dipping the pen in a glass of water, or just taking it with me on a boat and measuring some of these things. So that's like the futuristic view there. And sorry, what was the other question? I'm too bad with.
Oh, no, it's okay. He's asking what are the possible challenges that are yet to be explored and would be great if solved in this space.
Yes. So as I said, reducing the cost of the devices is one of the challenge.
Mhm.
Having having a number of other parameters, as one of the questions that come regarding COD and BOD,
Mhm.
is another challenge. Having better data to model for predicting BOD and COD is another challenge.
Mhm.
One of the things that I didn't get into the talk was around how for these machine learning models you need a lot of good training data sets, right? And as of now, we do not have enough training data set to create a reliable model. So that is another challenge, which again, with time, as more and more people start collecting this data, but also start making it openly available to other people and collaborating with each other, will resolve. In terms of IoT devices, I feel like the battery power for those devices, the capacity for the number of measurements that can be done at one stretch is another thing. You can also think about drones carrying some of these sensors and then just going on. There's this one example where in Singapore you have these sensors modeled and being taken around by sort of swarm bots, right? So you have swarm robots. So as an external user, you are looking at a swarm, but
Yeah.
just beneath the swarm, under this robot, you will have the sensors that are actually doing the measurements. So it's
Mhm.
something that you combine aesthetics and science. So those are the things that might be useful. Yeah.
Okay, that's great to hear, Priyank. And I hope some of the young audiences that are hearing us today would definitely take up the challenge and look at designing innovative and cost-effective solutions for these challenges. My question again is about the pandemic. We saw some pictures of beautifully rejuvenated Yamuna in the first month of the pandemic. So, did you have any chances to do any measurements in those times? And also, does it reflect that if the human activity slows down, we actually have a chance at letting the nature heal and letting our rivers clean themselves?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Darshna, for that question, because this actually leads me to talk about some of the work that we have done during the pandemic, right? My first intuition in the first month of the pandemic was that I need to be out there. I am the essential worker who needs to get the data. But it was difficult to go out and get data because it was dangerous. So we did end up doing some measurements in the following months, and we also helped two different other government departments. So we worked with urban development department in UP to look at the effect of the lockdown for the river Hindon in UP, and then some of our team members also worked with Punjab Pollution Control Board and looked at the effect of lockdown on the various rivers in Punjab. And from all these three, so our experience in Yamuna, Hindon, as well as rivers in Punjab, I can say that yes, there was a significant improvement in the water quality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was it enough? Not really. So there are some parameters that were still below the CPCB limits, which means that yes, water quality improved, and you would largely say that this water quality improved because industries were shut down. But there are the other parts of the equation, which is a municipal wastewater was something that was anyways going into the river daily, right? So that is
Yeah.
the unsolved equation. Another thing is agricultural runoffs, right? So that is also entering the river without these industries polluting. So as I said earlier, there are all these different aspects of pollution creation which needs to work in tandem and then stop the pollution. Can this be sustained for a long time? Yes, we can just remain in lockdown and then this will be as is. But no, on a serious note, I feel like if there is a possibility to say that 1 week a year we will shut down everything and let the river revive itself. Nature has enormous potential to rejuvenate, to revive itself, and I think we give ourselves a lot of credit, but we are the problem creators. So if we keep ourselves out of this, then the river has enough time to sort of mend the problems that we have created for it. Yeah.
Thank you, Priyank, for those concluding words about how we are the part of the problem and it's about to be time for us to be part of the solution and let nature heal itself. On behalf of VigyanShaala team and all the audiences here today, I would like to thank you for such an informative session, and I hope it has inspired some of the young listeners and also professors and students who joined us to think about how they could use their learning and understanding of the STEM degrees and the subjects that they are undertaking to solve some of these complex socio-cultural and also ecological problems. And I hope some of the students, if not all, are feeling very inspired. But as we gather from the comments that we are getting on our Facebook feed and also on the YouTube feed and in our WhatsApp groups, we realize that students have really enjoyed your talk. And to be honest, this is one of the most informative talks I have heard on this topic. So thank you very much again for making it so accessible and interactive. And thanks for being part of the mission to make scientific knowledge accessible to a wider audience. So thank you once again, Priyank. And we
Thank
hope that any students that have questions will direct them to you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Darshana, and thank you, VigyanShaala, for doing this service, so to speak, to the nation by encouraging more scientific dialogue amongst the younger generation. And always a pleasure to be part of these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope you have a good day, Priyank. So
You
we'll stop the live stream now, and a heartfelt thanks to all our audience today who joined us and asked the questions, from professors to students to our volunteers. So, and thank you, Vijay, for ensuring us a hiccup-less technical stream today. So thanks a lot once again, and take care. And we'll stop the stream now. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.